Hello my friends, I hope you're having an amazing day today, and welcome back to another episode of r/Prorevenge, where you come to get your daily dose of satisfaction by listening to other people get what they deserve. Guys, in this episode there's going to be two stories. The first is a pro-revenge that ends in an eviction over a parking spot. The second one is a little bit longer, that involves OP getting sweet revenge on behalf of her sister. It's an incredible story. I hope you stay for the stories today, and hit that subscribe button for future videos. This first story is by user CTB_of_fast, and it's titled, Yell at Us for Parking in a Reserved Space, Get Arrested, and Evicted. Last winter, around January, me, my family, and close friends were staying at our condo in Vermont for New Year's to celebrate. My dad owns the 8-unit complex our condo's in, and all but one had people up for the holidays. There's a decent amount of area for parking, but when there's a lot of people all there at once, it can get tight. So one night, after returning from the mountain, we parked in the spot closest to the stairs to unload everything easier. Our parking lot isn't one with actual spots or anything, because it's just gravel and dirt, so it's really just eyed out, and first come first serve. A few hours later, my brother went to the car to get something from the car, where there was a cardboard sign left on the car. The sign read, Reserved Parking for Unit 8, handicapped, on both sides. And yes, they forgot the N in handicapped on both sides as well. Like I said, there's no specific spots for anyone. Unit 8 was one of the smaller units on the ground level, about half the size of the rest. The couple that rented there was sketchy to say the least. They had to be in their mid-20s, but we never saw them much, and we didn't know too much about them. Let's call them Rick and Tara. Another 20 minutes later, I go down to the car to get some forgotten gloves. As I unlock the car, the lights alert them that someone's at the car, and through the window, Rick starts yelling at me, telling me I have to move the car by morning, or they'd have it towed. At this point, I can also realize that Rick is off of something, so I subsequently ignore him, grab my things, and head back up. I get into the condo and explain to my dad the experience I just had with Rick. At this point, he'd had enough and decided that he was going to go down there himself and handle things himself. So he goes down there to talk to them. My dad was really the only person that had met them before, but it was briefly during their leasing of their unit. He knocks on the door, and it's about 30 seconds until Rick angrily answers the door. He crankily asked, "What do you want?" And my dad politely explains that no spots are reserved, and it's first come, first serve. Rick instantly starts freaking out, saying that it's a handicap spot and that they're gonna call the landlord. They had a little experience with my dad when they leased the place about a year before, and in that time, he was diagnosed with cancer and he lost a lot of weight. With that, his appearance changed drastically. Rick didn't realize he was speaking to the landlord and kept his rant going. As my dad was gonna lay it out for him, he noticed on the table in the living area that there was a pipe of sorts. Paired with the behavior and appearance of Rick at the time, my dad concluded it was a pipe of sorts for drugs. He backpedaled out of the conversation and returned back up to our condo. When he got back in, he called the cops, explaining the situation and what he saw. 30 minutes later, the cops pull up and start talking to Rick. Going off what my dad told them about the pipe, one of the cops noticed it, but this time, out in the open with a bag next to it. At that point, it was revealed that they were both smoking crack, and they were both arrested. Along with that, my dad also evicted them from the property for violating terms, obviously. We ended up renovating the whole place afterwards because who knows how long they'd been smoking that inside. The upside is that the cardboard sign still hangs in the living room window and gives us a laugh each time we pass. Well, doesn't that suck? Yelling at someone for parking in a reserved spot, and in the end, getting arrested and evicted from the place you live in. Too bad OP's dad didn't pull the I am the landlord card, and watch Rick's face morph into a surprised Pikachu face. Oh, that would have been amazing to see his face. This next story is by user AngelGuideIndi, and it's titled, He ruined my sister's only birth experience, so I made sure he'd never forget her. Kinda my revenge, kinda my sister's. Both of us really proud. When I was 14, my oldest sister Sarah was 22, and we found out that she was pregnant with Paul, her boyfriend of 4 years. They immediately got engaged, and they were really happy. For a time. Sarah had a horrible pregnancy. About 16 to 18 weeks in, the wonder of creating a human life evaporated within her. She developed really bad morning sickness. She was constantly in pain, developed gestational diabetes, and just all around hated the experience. Around this time, Paul, the then fiancé, started getting sick of the complaining. I believe the argument was, your body is built to do this. It can't be that bad. Sarah was due around Valentine's Day, and Paul's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Doe, were very excited, both about the grandkid and the fact that he could be born on a holiday. She was very against that and really hoped that her son wouldn't be born on a holiday because it might make him feel that his day isn't very much about him. Well, Mrs. Doe says something like, well, if you name him Valentine or Valentino, then that'll make the day even more special for him. Again, my sister hated that idea. She thought it was tacky that he'd be bullied for it, and just really didn't like the name Valentino. Paul loved it, but agreed to go with a more average name like Daniel or Jared. Fast forward to February, and she was ready to get this over with. Sarah had officially been put on bed rest because while standing or walking, her blood pressure took unexpected spikes and dips. I look back now, and goodness, do I feel bad for her. She was doing her best to avoid giving birth on Valentine's Day because, again, she didn't want him to be born on a holiday. Unfortunately, births happen when they happen, and that baby was gonna come on Valentine's Day, whether she wanted him to or not. I remember waiting out in the waiting room with my dad, brothers, and Paul, who couldn't stand to be in the delivery room because it was gross. I was so mad that he could have gone in, but wouldn't because he thought my sister was gross while giving birth, whereas I had to stay outside because I was too young to go in with my mom and other sister. Dad went home with the youngest 2 brothers, while the oldest, Zeke, stayed to watch me because I refused to leave. 16 hours after Sarah went into labor, my little nephew was officially a part of the family on the evening of Valentine's Day. Unfortunately, Sarah was not okay. She had to have an emergency C-section, and while doing the operation, discovered that the back of her uterus had a very large and very severe non-cancerous tumor. When I say large, I mean it was twice the size of a standard uterus. The doctors were shocked and didn't understand why nobody had noticed it on the ultrasound. It accounted for her severe back pain and blood pressure issues. The doctors immediately went in for more surgery to remove the tumor, but sadly ended up having to perform a full hysterectomy. This meant that my nephew would be Sarah's only child. Now, while Sarah was in for surgery, Paul was taking care of everything baby-related to make sure his son was okay. In my 14-year-old self's memory, I remember him being suitably distraught, but I didn't really pay him much mind and spent my time in the waiting room with my mother and other sister. Zeke, however, wanted to be a good future brother-in-law and make sure that Paul was okay. He found Paul filling out the baby paperwork on his own, and in my brother's words, like he had not a single worry in his mind. Zeke asked why Paul didn't wait for Sarah to fill out the paperwork, as she should have been out of surgery within the hour, and Paul said that he just wanted her to get rest and heal. That checked out with Zeke, as he was 16 and didn't know any better at the time. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. No, he wouldn't. He knows how much she hates that name, and still, she'd need to sign the paperwork too. Well, my fellow peoples of Reddit, I regret to inform you that Paul forged Sarah's signature on the paperwork and waited until she was out of surgery to hand said paperwork over. My sweet nephew that was born on Valentine's Day was named Valentino on his first official birth certificate. I still to this day don't know why Paul and his family were so insistent about that name. He had even picked out a different one with my sister, and before you ask, no, he was never brought up on forgery charges because his parents were quote-unquote witnesses to her signing the papers, even though they only got there at the last minute. So Sarah dumped him and got her son's name changed a month later. she was willing to do split custody with him because that's her son's father, and she wanted that kid to know him. But Paul vanished, and she never heard anything back, which seemed weirdly out of character to us, until a mutual friend on Facebook was tagged in his wedding pictures 6 months later. Paul had apparently started cheating on her not long after she was pregnant. Sarah was livid, but there wasn't much she could do, so she filed for child support and continued to live her best life until 6 years later. And this is where the revenge starts, my friends. So Sarah has been a single mother for the past 6 years and has been amazing at it. At this point in my career, I've been a hairdresser for about 8 months at our local Great Clips. I'm working one day, and who is seated before me but Jane, Paul's wife herself. I take her back for a trim, and she clearly has no idea who I am. That adds up because a mutual friend that still keeps in contact with Paul said that Jane doesn't know a thing. No idea about Sarah, that she was the other woman, or that Paul actually has a kid that he's been paying child support for. She's in the dark on it all and has no idea. I told myself not to be an ass and treat her like a normal customer, which I did. Now, at this point, Jane was heavily pregnant, so a lot of our conversation was about that. She loved being pregnant, but it was hard, and said her husband was so unsympathetic, and that she was due in 10 weeks, and they still hadn't picked out a name for their baby girl. Ladies and gentle peoples, this was my chance. I asked what kind of name she was looking for, and she said, "I want something unique and unusual, but not ridiculous like, you know the ones I'm talking about." And Paul had suggested so many already, and she didn't like any of them. So I, the conniving little weasel I am, said, "What about Sarah?" My sister's name isn't actually Sarah. She was named after an older family member that passed not long after she was born, but there was no female equivalent for his name, so our parents created that one. It's a beautiful name, and just what Jane was looking for. She loved it, she stuck by it, and I found out by stalking her Facebook months later that she had put her foot down about it, and that was their daughter's name. Now Paul has a daughter with his ex's name to remind him every day about her, and to also remind him to pay his child support. Little nephew is 10 years old now, with a new name and no contact with his biological father, though we still sometimes do call him Val as a family nickname. He likes it, but doesn't want to bring it to school, so it's staying a family nickname. Sarah pretends to hate when we call him that, in a joking way, as long as he likes it and doesn't have a problem with it. And she's seeing a new guy who's really great and like a father to Val. What a great pro-revenge. Guys, imagine having a child whom you're so in love with and would do anything for, but their name is your ex's name. Guys, I love this revenge so much because it'll haunt him for the rest of his stupid frickin' life. Well done, OP. Executed a perfect pro-revenge for your sister. And that, my friends, wraps up today's episode of r/pro-revenge. If you're unsubscribed, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss future stories, and see you guys in the next one.